Welcome back to A Song of Ice and Fire, Iron Islands. In Part 1, we examined the symbolism of the Iron Fist and the Dead Hand, we explored the Iron Islands part in A Long Night Cataclysm, and we looked at science and fantasy pseudoscience as confirmation. In Part 2, we continue this, but we will start to focus more on symbolic textual confirmation of a volcano during the Long Night. This is Fiery Doom and Blood Rain.
And to Rhaego, son of Drogo, the stallion who will mount the world. To him I also pledge a gift. To him I will give this iron chair his mother's father sat in. I will give him 7 kingdoms. I, Drogo, Khal, will do this thing.
His voice rose and he lifted his fist to the sky.
I will take my Khalisar west to where the world ends, and ride the wooden horses across the black salt water as no Khal has done before. I will kill the men in the iron suits and tear down their stone houses. I will rape their women, take their children as slaves, and bring their gods back to Dothraki to bow down beneath the mother of mountains. This I vow. I, Drogo, son of Barbo. This I swear before the mother of mountains, as the stars look down in witness.
Okay, let's acknowledge a lot of similarities between the Ironborn and the Dothraki. They both show a surprising amount of self-determination in choosing their own leaders. They both raid, pillage, and commit mass sexual assault, though one does it in the sea and the other does it in the Dothraki Sea, which is a grassland. They both raise and eat large herds of goats. They're both considered barbaric, and they both lose their leader in the course of the story, whether that be Drogo or Balon. Now, Drogo promises his son a gift, not knowing it was actually the gift the faceless men give out, or death. He says it will be this iron chair, referring to the Iron Throne of Westeros. And even though the actual throne of the Iron Islands is not made of iron, this is a pretty good parallel. Next, his voice rose. Now, George snuck this different tense of the verb to rise in, but he still used the word rose in the same sentence as a fist lifts into the sky and he threatens to destroy Westeros. We've thought before of the ash cloud rising, we've thought of the dead hand opening. We should also conflate this rose imagery with our volcanic imagery of an eruption opening a caldera and spewing ash like a flower spews pollen. Then he says he will kill the men in the iron suits, and even though most mail in Westeros would be made of steel, this is a good way to tie in a mailed fist as well as the fact that we can think of men in the Iron Islands as men in iron suits. The rest we can largely ignore for unrelated symbolism, things that would require too much of a tangent, and general hyperbolic fantasy barbarian speak. Before I go further with symbolism, I want to add some elements to the picture we've created. Let's start with what we have. A mailed fist, a collision and fall resulting in a dead hand unfolding like an iron rose, a wick volcano, an ash cloud in the sky of the long night, and diamonds in the dawn. When we think of a volcano, we think of a mountain that erupts from volcanic activity. It spews some combination of ash and lava. Now, our volcano, if it existed, was at the island of Old Wick, with Great Wick forming a crescent beside it. A crescent displaying moon imagery like House Winch is extremely important here, especially since we see the dead hand of Drum on Old Wick. In addition to that, we see House Goodbrother on Great Wick. And we should note that the warhorn that is their sigil is also crescent-shaped. So why would there be excessive moon imagery by a volcano? Well, because one of the moon meteors fell near enough to the volcano to be symbolically the same as falling in, if it did not literally land in the volcano. When a large meteor lands, the intense impact can shake up a volcanic caldera enough to force an eruption, even if it does not land especially close. In fact, Even a meteor that landed in the ocean could set off a volcano by virtue of tsunami water entering the caldera. The volatility that occurs when the water vaporizes and also rapidly cools an upper layer of magma is a huge shakeup and can cause an eruption. So, graphically, we should recognize these things for what they are. A vaguely circular caldera that has a liquid, even though it is liquid magma, is a type of well. And if a moon meteor falls into that well, it is now a moon well. A volcano is also symbolically similar to both a candle and explosives like TNT. As we discussed earlier, candles and explosives both have a type of wick. And also like a volcano, they burn themselves after a fashion. The liquid magma is just molten rock, much like the outer volcano itself. It is melting part of itself, and that melted part often flows from the crater. That's another similarity here. The mouth of a volcano is called a crater, and lava can flow from it like melted wax flows down from the fiery wick. If the crater is also where a meteor landed, the word crater is pulling double duty. What else has George used for symbolism with this same heat coming from the peak of a mountain that can erupt? Gross, George. It's pimples.
She's prettier than I dared hope.
Edmure raised a hand before she could speak.
I know there are more important things. Spare me the sermon, Scepter. Even so, did you see some of those other maids Frey trotted out? The one with the twitch. Was that the shaking sickness? And those twins had more craters and eruptions on their faces than Peter Pimple. When I saw that lot, I knew Rosalind would be bald and one-eyed, with Jingle Bell's wits and Black Walder's temper. But she seems gentle, as well as fair.
Edmure raises his hand, which is another tense of the same verb we see applied as rose. He talks about another Frey girl who has a twitch or shaking sickness, which could be a reference to seismic activity in general from volcanic eruption, meteor impact, or an actual earthquake which could result from either phenomenon. Then he talks about twins, like the two former moons, who had more craters and eruptions on their faces than Peter Pimple. So he is clearly talking about pimples, but he uses the word craters, which can be a feature on the face of the actual moon as well as a result of a cataclysmic red comet collision. In the same breath, he mentions eruptions, just to put us in mind of volcanoes. Then he references his actual wife to be Roslyn, which means rose line, the context of line suggesting a bloodline. So we have a rose bloodline, a raised hand or hand that rose, craters, eruptions, and assuming she'd be bald, making her head look like a moon, as well as one-eyed. Try not to laugh thinking of George, a notorious film historian, recreating a trip to the moon while referencing Odin. With Jingle Bell's brain, the Lackwit fool, and Blackwalder's temper, which is described elsewhere as fiery. So think of a black meteor cloaked in flame as it hurtles through Earth's atmosphere. Now that we've made a sort of tenuous connection between pimples and volcanic eruptions, we have to talk about Chet. Chet is a man of the Night's Watch. He is a Leechman's son from Hag's Mire, which might as well mean Witch Swamp. We get witchy magic vibes from another swamp where we see Jojen our Green Dreamer come from, the Neck. Chet leads 13 Night's Watchmen in a conspiracy to desert the Night's Watch after killing some of their brothers. Chet is covered in boils, with a huge wen, or in modern terms, a sebaceous cyst, on his neck. It is described as being as large as a pigeon's egg, and we should recognize the general dragon egg speak here. We even see Chet after he's dead, and of course the wen on Chet's neck is now black instead of red. Just like the red comet hurtling toward the moon then becomes burning black meteors that crash to Earth and release a great black ash cloud, blocking the sun and covering everything in ice. In the same description, all of Chet's boils were covered in a film of ice, which we should recognize as long night language. And the reason I brought all of this gross analogy up is that The giant wen is on his neck. It's like a volcano that erupted and is now black, covered in ash. The volcano that was where the Iron Islands are now would be right next to the neck. And in fact, a combination meteor strike and volcanic eruption would most certainly cause a tsunami. A tsunami that is now remembered as the flooding of the neck. Now that I have you in mind of moon meteors creating moonwell craters and fiery wick volcanoes, let's look at an entire geographical location that includes these elements. The Fist of the First Men, where Chet dies. This in and of itself should make us think, so before we look at actual quotes for context, let's just sum up what we know about the Fist of the First Men. It was originally a ring fort built by the First Men, so it is stone, and called a ring fort for its round shape. Enclosed within the ruined fort is little aside from snow. It's a well, a round stone structure that contains water, even if it's in snow form. What is more interesting is how a volcano is paralleled in this scene. Jon's direwolf ghost informs him of a bundle of black wool containing a war horn, leaf-shaped spearheads, a dozen knives and arrowheads, all made of obsidian. Now the Night's Watch is a brotherhood, so Sam would be Jon's elder brother. Jon gives him the war horn, marking Sam as a parallel to the Grey King's leal elder brother, who founded House Goodbrother with their war horn sigil. The weapons are even more intriguing when you consider that obsidian is a volcanic glass that is referred to in-world as dragon glass. So we have marked this fist as a volcanic moonwell complete with volcanic rock. The fact that it is on a stony hill makes it a very similar but ruined analogy for Deepwood Motte, as it is the type of Motte and Bailey castle that is built on a hill or mound. The Night's Watch surround the Fist of the First Men with sharpened wood spikes, a terrible defense against the whites that attack them, but a great match for the wooden stakes that ring the outside of a Motte and Bailey castle. Let's remember that Deepwood Motte specifically was held by Asha, as we talked about in the last video. The castle was taken by the mountain clansmen who dressed up as trees in order to sneak right up next to the castle. Because of the haunted forest that comes right up to the Fist, the whites are able to sneak up on the Night's Watch holding it in the same way. Asha even thinks of a story she heard as a child where children of the forest turned the trees into warriors against the First Men, which is ostensibly what the others are, which makes the scene of the others sending the whites to kill Night's Watch even more apt. Not only that, but after normal arrows don't work on the whites, the Watch start using fire arrows. Firing fiery arrows from inside the symbolic volcanic moonwell caldera is pretty symbolically perfect for our idiom. We should also mention that obsidian is often referred to as frozen fire in the series, completing the moonwell caldera imagery with frozen water. And furthermore, we should acknowledge what the Fire and Blood Valyrians used obsidian for, which they had plenty of on their 14 volcano peninsula. Glass candles. A candle that fulfills the same classic fantasy role as a scrying mirror, but it's made out of obsidian. So the volcanic black glass weapons that mark this site as a moonwell volcano are literally lit to create a form of candle, making it a great comparison to the volcano of Great and Old Wick in the Iron Islands. Speaking of horns inside circular stone moonwell calderas, the moon appears in nearly every scene Deepwood Motte is mentioned, and the Glovers host the bastard of Lord Hornwood, Larence Snow, just like the literal Snow and Jon Snow at the Fist of the First Men. And with dragonglass being another name for obsidian, Deepwood Motte being at Sea Dragon Point is pretty on the nose. And should there be a historic connection between Old Wick and Great Wick into a volcano as I proposed, I should mention that in the chaos after Harrenhal was killed by Aegon the Conqueror, there was a great war in the Iron Islands. The leading claimant, Corn Valmark, uses his relation to Harrenhal to claim kingship of the Black Line. He loses to Aegon in single combat, but as the only other Corn in the book is a Night's Watchman with a famously maimed hand, it's a great symbolic connection. One more point for maimed, fiery, or bloody dead hands in the Iron Islands. Now we're going to get even deeper into astronomical disaster symbolism. In addition, we're going to add in another element that we see in some of these scenes, but more often in a larger symbolic sense. That element is the flooding of the neck. According to legend, the neck was turned into a swamp when the Green Seers used the Hammer of the Waters. Now, whether you believe the children actually did this or not is irrelevant. The point is to focus on the inconsistent idea that is the Hammer of the Waters. Magic aside, we believe a meteor hit the Arm of Dorne. The breaking of the Arm of Dorne, creating what is now called the Broken Arm of Dorne, is attributed to the Children of the Forest working sorcery at Moat Cailin. Moat Cailin is a castle built into a long, ruined wall of black basalt. The problem here is that a meteor smashing the Arm of Dorne almost certainly would not be able to cause a tsunami that floods the neck. It's not that tsunamis can't cover that distance. We've seen real-world tsunamis roughly twice every decade travel over 500 miles across open ocean, as well as up to 12 miles over land. The problem is that there is no path for a tsunami without taking a 100-plus degree left turn around the Vale of Arryn in order to hit the neck. The more reasonable solution is that a tsunami from the Iron Islands, which is very close to the neck, is what flooded it. But that makes these two events very similar, parallel events, and if the former Arm of Dorne that connected Westeros and Essos can be considered an arm, the peninsula that led all the way to the Iron Islands could also be considered an arm, or at least a hand. These two events happening at roughly the same time during a moon meteor shower might make primitive people think that the Children of the Forest caused both events with magic, and that the Hammer of the Waters at Dorne caused the flooding of the neck near the Iron Islands. They would blur into one event, and in a way, they were. So if this is true, theoretically, we should see lots of flooding of the neck imagery throughout scenes involving hands. First off, let's ask how you can flood a neck in a way that does not involve a good portion of a continent. For example, on an actual human. Well, symbolically, you could slit that person's throat. The heavy bleeding of a slit throat is often referred to throughout the series as a second mouth or a red smile. In that same vein, beheading someone plays a similar role. But the idea of slitting a throat, especially when done in an area that is heavily green with forest and associated with old gods, should bring to mind ideas both in the real world and in A Song of Ice and Fire of human sacrifice before trees. In the real world, it was much more common to sacrifice horned animals, which is one more use for the horn of House Goodbrother. Sacrifice a horned animal, use one horn for drinking, and one horn as a war horn. The shape of a horn is meant to invoke the crescent moon in the ritual sacrifice anyway. For that same reason, crescent-shaped blades are usually used. In A Song of Ice and Fire, we hear about sacrifices before werewoods and even see one happen in a Bran Greenseer training vision. He even tastes the blood as he sees through the tree's eyes. Let's not forget the red sap of werewoods makes the face carved into them look bloody, giving them a red smile like that of a sacrificial victim's slit throat. Now, slitting someone's throat under the moon before a tree is pretty brutal real-world in A Song of Ice and Fire imagery, but it's not the only way we see people sacrificed to trees. A great way you can sacrifice someone to a tree is by hanging. Odin did this to himself, and on the 9th day, he saw the runes. Without getting too deep into it, it's a sacrifice that involves a neck and the inability to breathe. When you hang someone or slit their throat, they can't speak, they can't breathe, and they die. So really any form of asphyxiation, drowning, or bleeding out from the throat should be considered fair game, as long as it involves some other imagery and symbolism we expect to find. So let's look at some quotes. He was a small, dirty man in filthy brown clothing, and he stank of horses. Catelyn knew all the men who worked in their stables, and he was none of them. He was gaunt, with limp blonde hair and pale eyes deep sunk in a bony face, and there was a dagger in his hand. Catelyn looked at the knife, then at Bran. "No," she said. The word stuck in her throat, the merest whisper. First off, he smells of horses, but Catelyn knows all the men who work in the stables, and he's none of them. He's an assassin, and this is a fun way to call him no one, as the faceless men refer to their assassins. A skeleton is also a man, or formerly a man, without a face. So we get a description of him with a bony face, gaunt, etc., like a corpse or skeleton. And we even get eyes deep sunk into that bony face like a crater. There is even a dagger in his hand, a black Valyrian steel dagger, we find out later, much like the black obsidian daggers found at the Fist of the First Men. Then she figures out why he's here, and tries to tell him no, but the word gets caught in her throat, almost as if she were unable to speak because her throat was symbolically slit, had a noose around it, was drowning, or otherwise blocked from speaking or breathing, as if her neck were flooded. Let's continue. He must have heard her.
"It's a mercy,"
he said.
"He's dead already."
"No," Catelyn said, louder now as she found her voice again. "No, you can't!" She spun back toward the window to scream for help, but the man moved faster than she would have believed. One hand clamped down over her mouth and yanked back her head. The other brought the dagger up to her windpipe. The stench of him was overwhelming. So he is now calling his assassination of Bran a mercy, just like how the gift of death the faceless men give out is called a mercy, and how Arya, acting as a faceless man, goes by the alias Mercy. Just to drive that point home, and to emphasize that Bran's coma is symbolic death, he refers to Bran as dead already. He clamps a hand down over her mouth, then brings a dagger up to her windpipe, referencing silencing her while also making it clear he's about to slit her throat and flood the neck. And onward. She reached up with both hands and grabbed the blade with all her strength, pulling it away from her throat. She heard him cursing into her ear. Her fingers were slippery with blood, but she would not let go of the dagger. The hand over her mouth clenched more tightly, shutting off her air. Catelyn twisted her head to the side and managed to get a piece of his flesh between her teeth. She bit down hard into his palm. The man grunted in pain. She ground her teeth together and tore at him, and all of a sudden he let go. The taste of his blood filled her mouth. She sucked in air and screamed, and he grabbed her hair and pulled her away from him. And she stumbled and went down, and then he was standing over her, breathing hard, shaking. The dagger was still clutched tightly in his right hand, slick with blood.
"You weren't supposed to be here,"
he repeated stupidly. So first off, we see a black Valyrian steel blade slicing through her palm. Later, she describes her hand as mostly useless with deadened nerves, meaning she has a dead hand in this scene, slick with blood. Or the drum sigil. Not only that, but she did it to keep the blade away from her throat, literally putting her hand between the dagger and a symbolic flooding of the neck. He shuts off her air, as if he were hanging her by the tree now that the throat slitting had failed. Then she bites his hand. Now he too has a maimed hand, and she has a mouthful of blood, like a weirwood tree's carved face. Then, just like Bran seeing through the Winterfell heart tree's eyes, she tastes the blood. The cat's paw even tore her scalp when he pulled her hair back, making her hair bloody as well as a bit kissed by fire, as it's auburn. This is another weirwood tree parallel, as their leafy canopies are constantly referred to either as bloody hands or on fire. She sucks in air, both attempts to sacrifice her having failed, and screams. This is the winding of a war horn, the scream of Nissa Nissa. It's a lot of things. Now, the stabbing of Nissa Nissa was almost certainly an air quotes stabbing of Nissa Nissa, meaning Azor Ahai didn't so much as impale her upon a sword literally, so much as he impaled her in sexual imagery. And the fiery sword he wielded afterwards that all of her warmth and strength and courage went into was her son. They were qualities passed on to her progeny. So when we see her let out a scream as he stands over her, breathing hard, shaking with a bloody dagger, we should be thinking sexual imagery complete with hymen blood on his dagger. It's okay, Ned. She's not really cheating on you. But wait, there's more. Catelyn saw the shadow slip through the open door behind him. There was a low rumble, less than snarl, the merest whisper of a threat. But he must have heard something, because he started to turn just as the wolf made its leap. They went down together, half sprawled over Catelyn where she'd fallen. The wolf had him under the jaw. The man's shriek lasted less than a second, before the beast wrenched back its head, taking out half his throat. What we see here is the scene mirroring itself, symbolically. Just as she turns away from looking outside and sees a man inside the room who tries to kill her, he turns away from Catelyn to see a wolf who tries to kill him enter the room. When Catelyn looked at the knife, she let out the merest whisper, which we then see again when Good Boy Summer's low rumble snarl is described as the merest whisper of a threat. The cat's paw tries to slit Cat's throat, only manages to slit Cat's paw, or hand. Then the cat's paw's paw, hand, gets bit by Cat, and Cat's Paw Patrol Grand Doggo tears out, or slits, the cat's paw's throat. Now, shame on George for this many puns, but the circular imagery is beautiful. And here's the finale. His blood felt like warm rain as it sprayed across her face. The wolf was looking at her. Its jaws were red and wet, and its eyes glowed golden in the dark room. It was Bran's wolf, she realized. Of course it was. "Thank you," Catelyn whispered, her voice faint and tiny. She lifted her hand, trembling. The wolf padded closer, sniffed at her fingers, then licked at the blood with a wet, rough tongue. When it had cleaned all the blood off her hand, it turned away silently and jumped up on Bran's bed and lay down beside him. Catelyn began to laugh hysterically. So, first off, the blood rain is a good match for tears falling from a moon maiden who has been smashed in the face by a red comet. The tears would be bloody, and they would come down to earth like fiery blood rain. Just to confirm this idea, George gave House Drum a Valyrian steel sword called Red Rain. It was stolen at one point from an armored knight, causing people to reasonably theorize that it was stolen from the now extinct House Rain, whose sigil is a red lion. A red lion of House Rain, Red Rain, sounds good enough. The seat of House Rain, Castamere, was on the coast of the Westerlands, ripe for Iron Island's reaving. But the more important thing we see here is Catelyn with a hand of deadened nerves. A dead hand, along with the bloody hand of a dead man. Another dead hand. 2 call-outs to House Drum, and his blood felt like warm rain. A good match for Red Rain, the weapon of House Drum. And of course this assassin was armed with a Valyrian steel dagger to make it all the more potent to call out. At the end, Catelyn laughs hysterically. She had already sucked in air and screamed as she fought for both her and her son's life. Now she laughs hysterically. This completes the Nissa Nissa imagery of a cry of anguish and ecstasy. And as horrific as this scene is for Cat, she apparently didn't get enough, because she comes back for the sequel.
Heh.
Lord Walder cackled at Robb.
The king in the north arises. Seems we killed some of your men, your grace. Oh, but I'll make you an apology. That will mend them all again. Heh.
Catelyn grabbed a handful of Jingle Bell Frey's long grey hair and dragged him out of his hiding place. "Lord Walder!" she shouted. "Lord Walder!" The drum beat slow and sonorous. Doom, boom, doom. "Enough," said Catelyn. "Enough, I say. You have repaid betrayal with betrayal. Let it end." When she pressed her dagger to Jingle Bell's throat, the memory of Bran's sick room came back to her, with the feel of steel at her own throat. The drum went boom, doom, boom, doom, boom, doom. "Please," she said. "He is my son, my first son, and my last. Let him go. Let him go, and I swear we will forget this. Forget all you've done here. I swear it by the old gods and the new. We will take no vengeance. The king in the north arises, a form of rose, talks about a king mending all his men, shades of a very macabre version of Humpty Dumpty here, which fits well because we have the Carthian origin of dragon story Dorea tells Dany, where the moon is an egg that cracks. And of course, like meteors, dragons' eggs are balls of stone. Even Jingle Bell himself, well, his real name is Aegon. Cat is once again trying to protect her son. She even calls out to the scene in Bran's sick room. We even get Boom Doom drums, invoking the Boom Doom drums from the Fellowship of the Ring scenes in Khazad Dûm, with the Balrog, where Gandalf is killed before later being resurrected. Next, she tries to convince Robb to rise up and walk out of the room, if not for her, then for Jane. But Walder laughs at her, that she thinks he would allow this. And the next quote? She pressed the blade deeper into Jingle Bell's throat. The Lackwit rolled his eyes at her in mute appeal. A foul stench assailed her nose, but she paid it no more mind than she did the sullen, ceaseless pounding of that drum. Boom, doom, boom, doom, boom, doom. Sir Ryman and Black Walder were circling round her back, but Catelyn did not care. Real quick, let's just recognize that Jingle Bell Aegon has been silenced, rolling his eyes in mute appeal. Even the fact that he is a Lackwit is a parallel, as the cat's paw in Bran's scene is described as repeating himself stupidly. And finally, he even stinks just like the cat's paw. Also, we again have the Boom Doom drum. As we've mentioned before, the dead hand of House Drum is part of all this imagery. When we combine it with Boom Doom, we're talking about a loud sound that brings doom, which could be a meteor impact or a volcano or both. It also should remind us of a later quote we already looked at when Benero's fiery hand pantomimes the moon destruction complete with the Valyrian glyphs for darkness and doom. This is another reference to the volcano of Lord of the Rings, Mount Doom, and since this requires a red comet to hit the moon, we see the fiery, tempered Black Walder, in other words, a red comet or fiery meteor, circling behind her. That's astronomical orbit speak before destruction of the moon. Robb had broken his word, but Catelyn kept hers. She tugged hard on Aegon's hair and sawed at his neck until the blade grated on bone. Blood ran hot over her fingers. His little bells were ringing, 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 and the drum went boom, doom, boom. She pulls Aegon Jinglebell's hair just like the cat's paw pulled hers, to slit his throat just as the cat's paw tried to for her. Blood ran hot over her fingers, kind of like lava from the volcano, so she has a bloody dead hand, just like the drum's sigil. And of course the drum is still going to signal this. Another fun aside, the bells the Freys cruelly put in Aegon's hair to turn him into Jingle Bell here are ringing just like the bells at Winterfell were ringing to alert people of the fire. And of course, Cat talks about keeping her word, invoking the idea of an oathkeeper, just like the black Valyrian steel sword her servant Brienne later wields. Finally, someone took the knife from her. The tears burned like vinegar as they ran down her cheeks. 10 fierce ravens were raking her face with sharp talons and tearing off strips of flesh, leaving deep furrows that ran red with blood. She could taste it on her lips. After the attack on Bran, she kept the cat's paw's dagger on her person until she got to King's Landing for Varys and Littlefinger to investigate it. A weirdly long time to hold on to the dagger, and she remarks upon how weird it is for her to keep the weapon close, and how much she doesn't want to hand it away, even temporarily. So this is a lot like that. Finally, the dagger is taken from her. Fiery or bloody tears are implied as they burn down her cheek, and she rakes her bloody cheek, specifically calling her fingernails ravens raking her face. Ravens are flying black animals that eat the dead, so using them as a stand-in for fiery or bloody meteors works well, especially since Catelyn is about to be dead and then undead, She even tastes the blood, just like when she bit the cat's paw's hand. She then describes slow red worms crawling along her arms and under her clothes. Worms can be spelled as WYRM to refer to dragons, or fireworms in A Song of Ice and Fire. So this is kind of a horrific call-out to the truly dark scene from Fire and Blood, where Arya Targaryen has what seem to be fireworms under her skin, burning her blood black from the inside. Next, Catelyn laughs hysterically because the streams of blood all over her she referred to as slow red worms are tickling her. She laughs until she screams. This is a completion of the agony and ecstasy Nissa Nissa story. Only, this is the reverse, a truly sad departure that involves her losing a son instead of birthing one, and then having her throat slit. Apologies for including these scenes. They're rough, but symbolically brilliant, and I didn't feel I could leave them out. The long, windowless hall beyond the door was as black as she remembered. She held needle in her left hand, her sword hand, the candle in her right fist. Hot wax ran down her knuckles. The entrance to the well had been to the left, so Arya went right. A black hall. Sounds like Harrenhal. And when Arya later arrives at Harrenhal, she thinks of a story old Nan had told about Aegon's burning of Harrenhal, in which the black stone had melted like candle wax. So, no surprise we get candle wax in this scene too. The molten wax runs over her fingers, again like lava over a dead hand or the Iron Islands. Now, carrying a candle and needle, her sword is much like carrying a sword and a torch. That's something the Zoroastrian god Mithras does as he travels through the underworld, and Azor Ahai borrows a lot from that character. Mithras is the morning star. Azor Ahai wields Lightbringer, which is a name for Venus, the morning star, which heralds the dawn by rising before the sun on its right, as its right hand. When Venus is on the left, at night, as the even star, it's much more of an underworld symbol. Arya, holding her sword in her left hand, makes her that even star figure, and sword fighting with your left hand is even called fighting sinister. She is traveling through an underground black hall, a pretty good match for the underworld. Let's also remember that the assassin who came to kill her brother, who Cat thought was no one she knew, also wielded his weapon in his left hand. And wouldn't you know it, Arya decides not to go down a well while she's here in the underworld, because if she went down a well with that wick, she'd cause a symbolic eruption, and the length of this video would kill me. So, with runtime in mind, I will finish with one example from our Symbolism superhero, Jack Frost. Jon Snow. Jon tried to shout, but his voice was gone. Staggering to his feet, he kicked the arm away and snatched the lamp from the old bear's fingers. The flame flickered and almost died. "Burn!" the raven cawed. "Burn! Burn! Burn!" Spinning, Jon saw the drapes he'd ripped from the window. He flung the lamp into the puddled cloth with both hands. Metal crunched, glass shattered, oil spewed, and the hangings went up in a great whoosh of flame. The heat of it was sweeter than any kiss Jon had ever known. "Ghost!" he shouted. The direwolf wrenched free and came to him as the white struggled to rise, dark snakes spilling from the great wound in its belly. Jon plunged his hand into the flames, grabbed a fistful of the burning drapes, and whipped them at the dead man. "Let it burn," he prayed as the cloth smothered the corpse. "Gods, please, please let it burn." First off, we see Jon has lost his voice from when the White tried to choke him. Classic silencing drowning of the neck. Next, we see him with the verb staggering, marking him with the stag that is a symbol of rightful Sun Kings all through mythology, folklore, and the real world. He kicks the arm away, invoking the breaking of the arm of Dorne. Then he snatches the lamp from Mormont's hand. A lamp is pretty much the same as a torch, and the word is used interchangeably. It's a fiery light you use to see. If this is a torch from J.R. Mormont's quarters, it's Mormont's torch, which is what the Night's Watch have been calling the Red Comet. The flame flickers and almost dies, like a candle moving too much. The raven, a black flying meteor symbol itself, tells him to burn the white in no uncertain terms. Jon spins like any good planetary body, flings the lamp into the drapes to light it on fire. He then plunges his hand into the flames, identical to when Stannis plunges into the flames to grab the poor approximation of the Lightbringer sword from the burning mother statue on Dragonstone. Again, with a mother stabbed in the chest like Nissa Nissa both was and wasn't, we should be thinking of sexual infertility imagery. Pulling the sword from the mother was delivering Lightbringer, and in that scene the sword is described as a mess, just like a baby covered in afterbirth, and then it is swaddled in a black cloak, like a baby. In this scene, we see the heat of it sweeter than any kiss, applying a similar brand of romanticized imagery. He shouts for his spirit wolf, and the white struggles to rise. Again, think rose. The white is struggling to rise because dark snakes are being born from his belly. Or rather, this man who is described as moon-faced is birthing serpents or dragons from the wound. Jon then plunges his sword, as we said, much like Stannis grabbing the fiery sword. So, astronomically, we see Jon the Sun King's stag throwing Mormont's torch red comet at the moon-faced man named suspiciously close to Other, who then births black snakes from his belly. He grabs a fistful of burning drapes and whips it, not unlike what Dany sees in the funeral pyre when Drogo's fiery whip cracks open and births the dragon eggs. Remember that the Dothraki call the red comet Drogo's fiery lash. Parallel birthing scenes involving a fiery weapon. And to complete the imagery with a dead hand, this white that just lost its arm had already lost its hand, when Ghost brought them the hand to inform them of Othor and Jafer Flower's bodies. They even sent Alazar Thorn, and let's remember that Dorn means both fist and thorn, with the dead hand to King's Landing to prove the story of the Walking Dead and ask King Joffrey for help. And with that, I'm absolutely spent. I hope you liked this deep dive into Iron Island's symbolism, and what it means for the original Long Night as well as the foreshadowing it brings for the end of the story. In the future, when I start doing live streams, I'll broach this subject again with everything I missed, both purposefully and by accident. Hit me in the comments with anything I left out. Please like and subscribe. Notifications on. And most importantly, thanks for watching. 1,000 Voices out. I know. I promise. Okay, but we'll play as soon as I'm done filming. Okay. All right, come on up. Come on up. All right. Oh, what a girl. Oh, what a girl. Oh, hi, sweetie. Oh. Here's the thing, Lucy, though. I gotta film. Yeah. You don't like it when I film. I know that, but... okay, sweetie. Oh, what a girl. You're gonna waste all the film. Oh.